Well, hello, everybody. Hello, Twinny. How are you and what have you been up to? Oh, I should have said, shouldn't I? Welcome to Debra and Peter, your podcast, in case somebody's come across this entirely accidentally and thinks, who the hell are these people?
Yes,
How have you been?
Debra Alcott-Tyler, the Chief Executive of the Directory of Social Change, and Peter Wanless, portfolio career beyond the NSPCC. Yeah, I'm very good, thank you. I went to a really fascinating book launch last week, The Art of Delivery, which is written by Dr. Michelle Clement. It was her PhD, which drew on the handwritten diaries of Sir Michael Barber, 600,000 words of them. And many people will know that Michael was the head of the Prime Minister's delivery unit in the Blair years. And I worked with him when he ran the Standards and Effectiveness Unit at the Department for Education and drove forward literacy and numeracy standards, in particular in primary schools. And he is now the chair of Somerset County Cricket Club, and I'm the president of Somerset County Cricket Club. So our paths have kind of intertwined down the ages. But this is a really, I think, really fascinating book by Michelle, who is the 10 Downing Street resident historian, which is a lovely
isn't that a wonderful job
to have? And she has there's a lot been written about the science of delivery, targets and focus and project plans and being accountable for this, that, and the other. But this book is more about the art of delivery and the personalities and the way in which you build culture to achieve focused change. And it's a tribute, I think, to the way in which the Prime Minister's delivery unit used to go about its work, that I could sit at this book launch last week with the very people who I had to account through to the Prime Minister for the progress which we were making in getting more young people to achieve 5 or more good GCSEs, including English and maths. Because I must admit, when I was doing that job, and what a ridiculous thing to sit in Whitehall and be accountable for at one level, I spent so much time having to explain what I was doing to my line manager, to the Treasury, to this unit, to that unit, to the other unit. But I always felt that the people in the Prime Minister's delivery unit were on my side, and we did some really good support as well as challenge. So as Michelle was describing the art of delivery and how you build cultures through delivery chains from the centre of government right down to the front line of the health service or the classroom or the people who clear the leaves off the train lines so that more of the trains run on time, those relationships and ways of working are really important to success. And there we were sitting with one another and feeling quite pleased and proud of ourselves in a funny little way, whilst recognizing, there is still so much to do in terms of improving public services, and it doesn't get any easier given the lack of money around at the moment.
That sounds absolutely brilliant, that book, Peter. Actually, I'm going to have to get it and have a read of it. I mean, because we know that at DSC, our biggest focus is not really on targets, it's on culture, so that people are because they're part of the culture, and the culture is, I've told you this before, based around our 2 values of excellence and empathy. And so the idea is to be as empathetic as possible with each other, with the people we deal with, but also to do everything that we can to an excellent standard. And we never really have to talk about standards or performance management because they basically self-direct themselves. And so, achieving things is not actually that hard. Well, it is hard because the context is hard. But actually, of course, the other thing that struck me as when you were talking about that is that, as part of the problem we have in charities too, isn't it, is that people think that you implement a certain set of changes and then that's it, job done. You've achieved your, whatever. And of course, the world changes constantly. There's no point at which you've ever done the job because, like even thinking about improving outcomes in education, there's no point at which this set of behaviors is going to get you a result, because the world changes, technology changes, what people need change, how they speak to each other change. And so I've always found it really interesting when people think that somehow or other it's a failure if a strategy that they implemented, they've now got to change. When for me, it's always like, well, strategies always have to change because the world changes, and so you're always going to have to restructure, re-strategize, do whatever to take account of the environment.
You are,
so,
you are, but also focusing relentlessly on ensuring that something that you've said is really important is going to happen, even if it's well beyond your direct control. Can happen, and there are huge kind of forces in government to stop at the announcement. So much preparation goes into getting to the point where you say, and there are going to be 40 new hospitals, and then you move on to the next thing, and nobody actually does anything to sort of follow through. So I think, the art and science of delivery is another way of expressing, good strategy demands effective execution, and how you work with and through others to achieve, as I say, those outcomes that you can't just announce have happened, especially in Whitehall, but equally in a charity, because you need to mobilize people with different thoughts and perspectives and accountability regimes behind something shared. So it's good. I think it's anyway. The Art of Delivery by Michelle Clement, and
go on.
And I found I put a little plug for it on LinkedIn, and I found a photograph of me and Michael Barber and the Prime Minister Tony Blair and the Cabinet Secretary at the time, Richard Wilson, and the Permanent Secretary at Number 10, Jeremy Hayward, the late Jeremy Hayward, who was key to all of this. And we're all standing in a line, walking along a corridor, and I thought, well, there's a piece of history.
Blimey, Peter. As you know, it's going to sound like a weird link, but talking about the art of delivery does just take me to Ukraine and the war in Ukraine and the absolute masterstroke of genius of President Zelensky. So for listeners who aren't familiar with what happened, basically, for the last 18 months or so, the Ukrainians have been plotting this plan to get drones with weapons right into the heart of Russia and attack Russian air bases and Russian military bases. And nobody knew that this was going on. Anyway, it's happened. So they've gone in and they've destroyed loads of planes and munitions, things and stuff like that. And it's come as a real shock. And I read someone's, but what's particularly clever about it is what President Zelensky has done is he's told everybody how they did it. And you've had military commentators saying you shouldn't have told, you've given away secrets. But actually, he's been crazily clever because he's told them that how they did it. So they smuggled all this thing on, and like low hundreds, I think, of articulated lorries and long distance lorries and things like that. That's how they smuggled it all in. And so, of course, what's happened is not only is it given a real shock to Russia, but now nobody trusts a lorry on Russian roads. So they've slowed down the whole movement of goods around the country because for all they know, that might be, a lorry that's got a bomb in it. And it's just, for me, it's like the long-term strategic thinking of that, not just about the actual destroying of the weapons, but the damage to morale and the increase in fear. Like suddenly those of us in the middle of Russia are not safe from attack. And I just thought, it's kind of a weird link, I suppose, to charities, but I think, and to government actually, but there's something about the value of like holding your breath and waiting for a long-term plan to come off. And we're doing that at DSC at the moment. We're changing we've got a new product strategy for one of our key products, and it's going to take a while to implement before we get any benefits. And people do wobble, as we're waiting to, we've got to put the things in place and then we've got to make it all happen. And hopefully by next year, we will see the benefits of it. But it's quite hard for people to wait and trust that, this will pay off, rather than start panicking and saying, right, let's change our minds and do something else to deal with the current situation. Anyway, it just got me thinking about long-term thinking and stuff. And also telling people how you did it. I thought it was absolutely brilliant.
Well, it sounds a little bit trivial relative to a war between Russia and Ukraine, but you've triggered a memory that I have of a really brilliant presentation that I saw from a group of people who were responsible for something called report remove. So now if you are a young person and you post, or someone posts an explicit image of you online and you want to get it removed, through a partnership between the Internet Watch Foundation and NSPCC Childline, you can now go through the Childline website and get that image removed in a reasonably straightforward fashion. So we knew some years ago that that was what we wanted to do, and announced that was what we wanted to do. My goodness, to achieve that, it literally took years, up to and including involving the Home Secretary themselves and NECMEC, who are a huge organisation in America who take images down off the internet. And you would not believe the complexity and the patience and the diligence which people in all sorts of organisations had to apply in order to arrive at the outcome. And when the outcome was available, it sort of had teething problems as well. But I remember seeing a presentation from the folk who had painstakingly worked with one another to make this thing happen, and that was a revelation, because it was exactly demonstrating, as you've described, not so much the intent, which everyone thought was brilliant, and the outcome, which everyone thought was brilliant, but in between there was this incredibly messy, complicated, resilient, shared sense of purpose which people worked tirelessly on to make happen. And hearing them talk about that was, fascinating. And people like you and me sort of sit over the top and take the credit and say, this thing was put in and this thing happened. But the real brilliance was in that patience and determination to make the thing happen. And I think because the goal was so obviously the right thing to do, we got there in the end, but it was by no means inevitable. And there's so many lessons in that process, which are the ones that we really need to learn if strategy is going to be effectively executed.
Because you're so right, Peter. That reminds me of DSC's governance app. We have this free governance app where boards can evaluate their performance against the 7. What's it called again? The governance code, against the 7 key items in the governance code. So I don't know why my brain's gone doolally today. Anyway, it's the interesting thing about it is, from concept, from the idea to the actual realization of it, was at least 4 years, because we had to convince somebody to fund it. We had to, and in fact, our editor of this podcast, Jose, is the chap who actually was leading that through and getting it to completion. And so the idea was brilliant, a governance app. We got a governance app in the end, which is great, and also gives us metadata about what boards are thinking about their performance across the thing. But the in-between bit was messy, slow, frustrating, back and forth to the developers, because they wouldn't have got it right, or we wouldn't have briefed them right, or we did brief them right and they misunderstood, or whatever. I mean, it was so messy and untidy. As well, of course, it was funded by several different funders. So having to navigate, our way around those funders and give them the updates of how the governance act was progressing, etc. And I think, people do often forget that it's messy in the middle, but that's okay, because it's often the messiness that gets you the great results. So, So listeners out there, if you're in the messy middle, don't worry about it. You'll get there in the end.
Yeah, keep focused on the outcome you want to achieve.
Yeah. Talking of which, Volunteers Week this week, Peter. Of course, we don't really use volunteers at DSC for obvious reasons. We have had volunteers in the past, mind, who have been wonderful. And in fact, one of our volunteers we had before has actually come back to work for us. So that's a result. But of course, NSPCC, thousands of volunteers, haven't you got there? So thoughts on Volunteers Week, Peter?
Yeah, yes, they have lots of volunteers. I am now one. Actually, one of the most rewarding and interesting bits of cross-sector work that I was involved in the last couple of years at NSPCC was a group looking at shaping the future of volunteering, which was chaired by Catherine Johnston at the RVS.
Yeah, I know Catherine well. Used to be my chair.
Right, yeah, and the two of them sort of pulled together initially about a sort of dozen of us who depended and relied upon volunteers to try and think with one another about what can we do to mobilize and celebrate and create better sort of pathways with one another into volunteering, because we were all both incredibly excited and exhilarated by how many people stepped forward during the lockdown to get involved with things which were important to them. But then also, when the world kind of opened up afterwards, quite a lot of volunteers who'd been regularly doing things in a particular way in the past didn't come back. So there were some really great conversations among chief executives, and I believe the group's still going on, and the big help out emerged as part of this kind of collective endeavor to try and share and celebrate with one another the things which make for really excellent volunteering, and create pathways within and between organizations, because there's so many different. Volunteering means different things to different people, doesn't it? And you don't. Some of the opportunities which the NSPCC has or Citizens Advice have, for example, are quite heavy duty. I mean, they are amazing opportunities to develop skills and on a regular basis both contribute something positive to the nation, but also, develop your own sense of kind of self-worth and employability and on all sorts of other things. But equally, there are so many people that will just do something around the corner from where they live and feel better as a result, and the community will be better as a result. And sometimes those conversations have got rather sort of polarized.
Yeah.
And we all had a kind of collective interest in sharing and celebrating and encouraging these sorts of people, because they some have a particular loyalty to a particular brand, but many just want to
help,
find an easy way to get involved. And so many of our organizations and good causes are nothing without the volunteers.
But it's one of those funny things about volunteers. Like, we're so grateful, and it's wonderful that people volunteer. It's one of the best parts of human beings. And actually, people volunteer often without even realizing that's what they're doing. So, it's an innate part of human nature to step up and help out other people, which is why I get irritated when people talk about trustees who are volunteers, and that somehow or other they should be paid because their volunteering is more important than people delivering the service. So anyway, that's a debate for a different time. But of course, I think what people often don't understand or recognize is that managing volunteers is expensive, it's costly, it's hard work. I mean, let's be honest, volunteers are wonderful, but there are some who you wish wouldn't. There are some individuals who are quite tricky to deal with, obviously, because it's human beings. And sort of trying to provide a reliable service when you're relying on people who volunteer takes a lot of work and effort and energy. And I'm always in awe of organisations like Samaritans, for example, or Guides or Scouts or NSPCC volunteer, where people actually do a proper commitment to a role, so you're not constantly worrying that they're not going to turn up. But yeah, I think it's often unsaid that it's expensive and hard work as well to manage volunteers. It's not, their labor might be free, but it isn't free to train them, to organize them, to give them feedback, to support them, to make sure they're in the right place at the right time. It's a big job. So shout out to all those volunteer managers out there who maybe don't necessarily get the credit for you're doing a fantastic and amazing job. Because it's all very well volunteers rocking up and saying, I want to help, but somebody's got to help them help, if that makes any sense.
Yeah. And we know from what volunteers really value often is a sort of sense that someone is there for them. So they don't want to be, micromanaged and instructed and told you do this at this time and all the rest of it, because that's the nature of, paid employment. But they do want to know that they are listened to, they're valued, they're often, part of something bigger than themselves. And there's a real skill in creating that sense of connection, isn't there? Without instructing people that you must do this in this way at this time.
Yeah. And
so I agree.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing I would say is that I think quite a lot of charities treat their volunteers very differently to where they treat the staff in terms of engaging them in consultations about the future of the organisation or the way in which things are done. And I think, where those charities that do ask their volunteers, what do you think about our new strategy or our new way of doing something or whatever, benefit hugely from tapping into that wealth of experience and on the ground knowledge and stuff like that. So anyway, volunteers.
And everyone is different. And I feel like this as an NSPCC volunteer. I like to at least be aware of what's going on. So there is a kind of volunteer hub which I can access, and I can discover little bits and pieces about what the charity is doing. But there are also lots of volunteers, I know for sure, the last thing they want
is to be asked questions.
Not another strategy, please. Just let me, I've come here to do a good thing, and I'd just like to get on with it. Thank you very much. No more emails, no more messages, no more strategies. Leave me alone.
That's a very good point. You've got to get the balance right, haven't you?
Yeah.
Good. And then the other thing that I had in my mind, Peter, was, of course, the announcement, I think it was yesterday, of the Dormant Assets Fund, the new tranche of money that's being released this time around, which the government is saying will add up, they think, to about 440 million, which they're not guaranteeing, but, they think it'll be that amount. And I always think about dormant assets. It was a genius idea to gather up all those, bits of money and savings pots that, I'm pretty sure I've got a long forgotten bank account somewhere that's probably got £5 in it or something, which I'm never going to claim back, but which, aggregated could be brilliant for other people. So it's a good idea. It's great that it's happening, although, of course, people have to agree to participate. So not all financial institutions do participate in it, do they? But so they're still persuading what to do. But what I found really interesting is they've split it out to 4 key areas: youth, financial inclusion, social investment, and community wealth funds. But what's sort of interested me quite a bit about that is how often that, so activities that support financial inclusion are probably going to also support youth by default. It's interesting the way they separate it out. And they're often, I always think this about when people talk about arts and heritage, they treat that separately. So here's money for arts and heritage and here's money for charities. And I'm always thinking, but most arts and heritage organisations are actually charities. You do realise that, don't you? So it's quite funny. But anyway, it's good news. And about 87 million or so is going into what they call social investment, which is about strengthening charities and social enterprises. So although actually, as I said, the youth, 132 million into youth will also benefit charities. So actually charities are benefiting in pretty much all of the 4 areas that the government have prioritised. Anyway, so that was a bit of good news this week, I think.
It's great, yeah. Do we know how they're going to distribute the money? Because back in the day when I was at the Big Lottery Fund, we distributed some of the dormant assets, and it always. I used to have this kind of vision for the National Lottery Communities Fund is a funder who really is expert in knowing how to assess applications and decide where the money should go. And there are all sorts of people in and around government who play at being a funder. So I hope that in the way in which they work out how to distribute these funds, not too much gets kind of tied up in application processes and fragmentation.
So what they've said is they're going to work with the National Lottery, but they're going to have like a separate brand, I think. Because they're very, and it's quite an interesting thing. It's because what they want is they want the money to be distributed in line with ministerial priorities. And I think they've decided that the only way to do that is to create a separate pot and a separate brand to whatever the National Lottery does. And they haven't set that up yet. I think that's still something that's being worked on. And obviously they're trying to align it around the government's key missions. Although always have to laugh whenever anybody says the government's 5 key missions, because for the life of me, Peter, I cannot remember what any of them are. Something about starting the economy is one of them, I think. Something about keeping the streets safe.
It's a problem, isn't it?
It's like, if people can't remember it can't be inspiring. I come back to this age-old thing about bloody Labour comms. I want to take her and try to shake her by the neck and say, for God's sake, get this right. If people don't remember, then you've got, anyway. But so definitely something around the missions, and I will have to refresh my mind on what those missions are, because I'm giving a keynote tomorrow where I'm supposed to be updating what the government's up to. So I better double check my facts, haven't I?
You had. The other thing that I remembered on about dormant assets is that when I was at primary school, we were invited to enter an essay writing competition for under 11s, which was run by the Bristol and West Building Society. I don't even know if they still exist. And there were three titles for the essays. 2 of them were like stories, and one of them was the role of the building society in the national economy. And because I was a sort of precocious child, and they made us enter this competition, I thought, well, I'm not going to write the stories. I'm going to write about the role of the building society in the national economy. I knew nothing at all about economics or anything like that. But anyway, I wrote something and I came third, and I won £2, which was put in a Bristol and West Building Society account. And I have no idea where my £2 is. So somewhere within those dormant assets, I'm sure I will be donating at least £2, which was the product of my brilliant assessment of the role of building societies in the national economy. So there you go.
That is a wonderful story, Peter. That really makes me laugh, and so apt to talking about dormant assets. That's so funny. I mean, gosh, this is how old we are. I remember I used to get £1 a week pocket money, and I used to go to the bank at lunchtime, write out a cheque for £1 and have them hand over the £1 in the, hand over £1 in the bank, and you had to queue. I mean, this was way before ATM machines and, cash machines. Long time. It makes me laugh when I think about it now. When you talk to younger people today, but no concept of having to write a cheque go into a bank and cash your cheque. And also, the days when my first job, we didn't get our money straight into our bank accounts. We were given a cheque, and we had to take the cheque to the bank and deposit it ourselves. So it's like and it might seem like it was a long time ago to young people, but for me, it's like in such a short space of time, how the world has changed so profoundly and dramatically in how we operate.
Yeah, we got paid in cash at Woolworths when I worked there. It was £1. It was £1 an hour. And when I started, I wasn't old enough to do a full day, so I did half a day. So that was 4 hours. So £4, 4p. And I would get in cash. I used to work mornings, and then the pay went up a bit, and I got to work a full day, and that was like £8.50 on a Saturday.
And you must have felt like you were rolling in it, Peter.
Definitely. You get a few drinks for that if you could get served.
You wouldn't, for £8 a day, though. You wouldn't even get half an hour of somebody's effort. That's again how prices have gone up. Yeah, fun. Anyway, I suspect we've run out of time. Have we?
Yes.
We've covered quite a lot today.
We do. We're going to take a break, aren't we? Because you are going to go for a well-earned holiday.
I am. I absolutely am. And much as I love our listeners, Peter, and I love you, and I love our producer, Jose, I really quite like to switch off and not have anything to do with any of you for a while.
Well, that's absolutely fine, and it works quite well for me. Next week is the Somerset County Cricket Club annual general meeting, where the members are currently voting on whether on a number of things, including whether they agree that Peter Wanless should be allowed to serve a second term as club president. So it's a bit of a brutal expression of democracy, because it's yes or no.
Blimey. I'll keep my fingers crossed for you, Peter. I hope any Somerset members,
Please
vote for Peter for president.
So that's next week. It helps that we have the men have won their last 5 games since we continue to win since discussing our disappointing start to the season on this podcast. So long may that continue. So I hope when we reconvene in 3 weeks, I think we're going to have 2 weeks off, and we'll be back for episode 32 in the last week of June. I hope to be able to say that I remain the president of Somerset County Cricket Club. I hope to be able to announce that I am the chair of a very important charity, which I'm excited about, but still not quite able to announce to everybody. And my days will be getting even more full, but there'll always be time for you, and there'll always be time for the podcast.
No, thank you, Peter. Well, whilst all that exciting stuff is going on for you, I should be drinking cocktails, lying in the sun, and reading an endless number of books. Anyway, thanks everybody. See you in a couple of weeks. Take care. All. Bye. Bye.